So today, I'm preaching on the subject, thriving in relationships. This subject is so important that it begins in chapter 2 and goes halfway through chapter 3. And so this was a major teaching for Peter as he was talking to people in that day who were under persecution, who had difficulty. They were troubled about how they should live in light of their present day, and that's for us today. And there's 4 key areas, and I'm going to touch on them, give them to you first. I should get through today, but there's 4 areas that we're going to talk about. First of all, he talks about thriving in government. We'll see that in chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. And how we reconcile this thing with living as citizens of heaven in a foreign land, and what our relationship should be in government or to government. And then we're going to talk about relationships in the workplace. That's a relationship that trips up a lot of people and keeps us from thriving in life. It's those workplace relationships. Some of you, just me saying that word work, you're already depressed because you think, I got to go there tomorrow. But God wants you to thrive there. God has put you here to thrive in the workplace. And so, thriving in the workplace. And then, the third subject that we'll address picks up in chapter 3 and verses 1 and following, and it's thriving in marriage or in the home. And that's also a source of contention in relationships. And then the final one is thriving in the church. How does all this relate to the church? And so God wants us to thrive. And so you can tell already I've got a lot of ground I'm going to cover today, but I'm going to try to do it very quickly. So first of all, let's jump right in and talk about thriving in government. Chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, if you just want to hold your place right there. We'll look at those scriptures in just a moment. As citizens of heaven, we face the temptation of being indifferent and even showing disdain toward the world and those who are placed in authority in government. Now, I don't know of anything that's more pertinent to us, because there is a lot of disdain and rebellion. You know, anarchy is something that's sort of a word that's thrown around now and has been for a few years. But there's a lot of rebellion, even among Christians, when they think about the government. And no matter what your view is about politics, I think we could all agree that government seems to be broken in our world. It seems to be broken. There's so much bureaucracy and red tape, and no matter who you think's to blame for it, there is a sense of disdain among Christians and a sense of rejection of government. But Peter wants us to understand that if we're going to thrive in life, then we're going to have to know how to have a right relationship in relation to the government, because we are under their authority. And, you know, Peter, of all people, can write about this. He was the guy that when the government came, he picked up a sword and cut off a government official's ear. By the way, I told you kids I would give you an assignment. Here's your assignment. How many times will I use the word relationship? Starting from now. Relationship. Count them. That'll keep you listening, give you something to sort of think about what I'm saying. So, how many times will I use the word relationship? I've already used it 3 since I gave you that assignment. If you're counting, kids. So, here's the thing. Peter tells us here, there's one word that shows up in every one of these passages of Scripture. One word. And it's the word submit. It's a command. Let's look at verse 13. He says, therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme or to the governors as to those who are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, that that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. He said, as free, yet not using your liberty as a cloak for vice, but a bondservant of God. And then he says, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. And so he gives us this command about submission here. And this is really important you understand what this submission means, because it shows up in every area that we're going to talk about today. The word submit yourselves, it means to arrange in formation under a commander. Here's the simple way. It means to know your place. It means to know your... doesn't have anything to do with your value. It's not that the person in government is better than you, or the person in your boss at work is better than you, or your spouse is better than you, or even another church member is better than you. It's to know your place. It's to find your place and be in it. And you know what? One of the greatest things that will lead to happiness is to know your place and be in it. Recognizing those who have authority. Not that they're better or greater. They just have a different place. And so he says to us, in relation to government, submit yourselves. Quickly there. What's the motive? Verse 13 says it's for the Lord's sake. That means to honor the Lord. Are you saying, Brother Scott, that I should obey the laws of our nation because it honors the Lord? That is exactly what I'm saying. Now that goes from seatbelt violation. Now I saw that grimace. Me too. Speeding violation. All the way up to every other ordinance. He says, every ordinance of man. He didn't ask us if we agreed with it. But Peter tells the people, in order to thrive in life, keep the ordinances. All of them, he says. He says, and do it for the Lord's sake, or to honor the Lord. So we see the motive. What's the extent of it? I already told you that. Every ordinance. He talks about in verse 13, every ordinance of man. He goes on, whether to the king as supreme. In other words, for us, we don't just obey the president or the federal government. He goes on down. Or to the governors. Those who are lower level authority. As to those who are sent by him for punishment of evildoers. In other words, these laws are in place. Verse 15, he says, for it's the will of God. Now, you know, we're building a church, hoping to. We're clearing property. And I want you to know, there is a lot of red tape. I'm sure some of you think, what is taking so long? There's so much red tape. You got to have, I've said it several times, I said you can't sneeze without having 3 engineers give you to tell you it's okay. And then you got to get 3 permits for that. But the extent is that we are to obey all the ordinances of government. He goes on, he tells us the reason. He says in verse 15, for this is the will of God, that by doing good you may put to silence. Put to silence. It means to restrain, or to muzzle, or to make speechless. What he's saying is, if you obey what the ordinances are, then no one can speak evil of you. You know, as a church, we have to be careful. You know, if you go out here as an individual and you get in your car, it may not take notice whether or not you're a Christian if you're speeding. But I want you to know, if that church van's going down the road 70 miles an hour and the speed limit's 45, there's a problem. So, as Christians, we should think the same way. As a Christian, I am dishonoring God if I do not keep the ordinance of man. And I know some of you are thinking, this is not what I wanted to hear today. Well, he gives us the attitude. What attitude should we have? Verse 16, he said, as free men. Because we're free. Not because we're bound by this law, but because we are bound by a higher law. In other words, we are without the covering. We're not under the subjection of them except for the fact that God has placed us there. And because we submit ourselves to God, so we must submit ourselves to the government. I'm going to leave this point, but I want to leave it with one thought. Today, Georgia Baptist has encouraged that today be Christian Citizenship Sunday. And what they're encouraging us, and it just happened to do, worked out, and I said, hey, great, that'll work with my message. What they're encouraging us is to remind you it's important to vote. And so, just to remind you of that, if you are a non-voting Christian and you're eligible to vote, you should vote. Obey all the ordinances. It's your privilege. And so I've got a voter registration here in my hand. There's a stack of them on that table out there. I'm just making available to you. I want to encourage you, if you're 17 and a half years of age, you'll be 18 before the next election. Midterm elections, I think, are coming up. All the rules are on there. Just pick up the application. There, you can mail it in. You can take it to the local courthouse. Won't cost you anything. It's an obligation that you should take part in. And besides this, I always said you shouldn't complain about the government if you don't take your opportunity to vote. So Christian Citizenship Sunday, encourage you. Live in a right relationship with government. It's important. Number 2, live in a right relationship in the workplace. Now this is where it gets kind of down and dirty. Some of you are saying, I wish you just stayed on the government. Because you don't really want to submit to your boss. You really don't want to submit to that person who has authority over you. You really like to complain about your job. Hey, I want to try something. If tomorrow you make up your mind today, tomorrow I'm going to work and I'm not going to complain about my job, your day will be better. I guarantee you your day will be better if you don't complain about your job. Let's read the text. Verse 18. Servants. Now you understand that in that day there was masters and servants. But the rules are the same. Servants, be submissive, there's that word again, to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the harsh. What it's saying is, whether they treat you good or they treat you bad. You say, I'm not going to let anybody run over me. Well, quit your job then. But don't hang around and complain. It's true. Wait on it. Yeah. For this is commendable, if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. In other words, whether they treat you good or treat you bad, God is commendable before Him. Verse 21, for to this you were called. Did you know as a Christian God has called you to this? Because Christ also has suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow His footsteps. What footsteps? What are you talking about? The Bible says that Jesus humbled Himself. He became the lowest, even to the death of the cross. And I was thinking, during Sunday school, I was thinking how terrible the cross was, but what a picture it was of humility. You see, in the workplace, you can thrive in life if you live in the right way in the workplace. We're to be concerned with obedience and submission to God's will rather than personal rights. Personal rights, that's a big deal. People are always talking about, I've got a right, I've got a right. It's my right. Hey, if that man or that woman hires you to do a job and he says, I'll pay you $5 an hour, X amount of money, and you said, I'll take the job. Do the job. without complaining. And when you don't want to do the job anymore without complaining, turn in your notice. It's pretty simple. That's Bible. Now, it's quiet in here, isn't it? Am I the only one? But that's Bible. God taught me that when you say it's easy for you. You don't work for anybody. I work for God. But God taught me this when I was in the workplace, and God taught me to honor those who had authority over me, whether I agreed with them or not. And it served me well. And it will serve you well. You can thrive in life. Why should we thrive in the workplace? There's two words that are mentioned here, or two phrases that's mentioned that I want to just point out, and then we're going to move on. First one, he says, do it with fear, with all fear. What that means is with respect. It means to do it without bitterness, negativity, with a gracious honor to the unkind and the unreasonable. You don't think it will get your boss's attention if he treats you ugly and you treat him sweet? He's going to go, huh. And if you keep doing that, when it comes time that he has to trust somebody, you know who he's going to trust? The one that he's treated badly and they treated him with respect. It makes a difference. Hey, I'm talking about thriving in life. You say, why don't you just get off this subject of relationships and preach the Bible? Friend, I want you to know relationship is all through the Bible. If you can't be right with your fellow man, you'll never be right with God. I know, you didn't want this morning. Well, a spoonful of sugar helps them go down. So I want to try to give you some sugar here in a minute. But there was a second word. We'll get to that. There was a second word. Commendable. It's used twice in this passage of Scripture. And all that simply means is do it in purpose towards God. With purpose towards God. Understand that what you do to your employer or to the person who has authority over you, do it with purpose towards God. Paul told the Colossians, whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Do it heartily as unto the Lord. Number 3, there's a third relationship, and it'll get quieter here still. And it's the relationship of marriage. He says in chapter 3, verse 1, wives likewise. Now the word likewise, it means in the same way. In the same way that Christians should submit to the government, in the same way that Christians should submit to their employers, in the same way, wives, be submissive to your own husbands. You say, that's where I think the Bible is unfair. Well, just hold on. And then we can decide if it's unfair or not. You see, he starts off with this broadest unit, this biggest institution. And then he comes down to the workplace. That's a smaller unit. And then he comes down to the home. And that's the smallest unit of relationships. So what are wives supposed to do? Verse 1, let's just read it and then we'll skip to verse 5. Likewise, wives, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. Look at verse 5. In this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Verses 2 through 4 talks about how you conduct yourself. It talks about being modest in your dress, in your apparel, and really in your spirit. It talks about a faithfulness to be to your own husbands. And so wives are to be faithful to their own husbands. And that should reflect everything about them. It should reflect the way they honor their husbands. It should reflect the way they dress themselves. It should affect the way they keep the home. It should reflect all these things. Because he says it's how the women of old did it, showed submission to their husbands. So be faithful and then be modest. I don't have a lot of time to spend there. But don't let TV tell you what modesty is. Don't let the magazines tell you what modesty is. I don't want to be graphic about this, but Christians have lost the sense of their directives from God. They take their cue from TV or from society or from magazines or movie stars or wherever. Even clothes designers. And I know what some of you are going to say. You say, well, you just can't buy anything that doesn't have a low cut in it. I beg to differ. You can, if you really want to. And if you have to, you can do what my wife does. She's not in here, I don't think. I don't need her. Oh, she's going after the baby crying. I thought she was going after my wife. Tammy, she'll buy us tank tops, and you girls all know a tank top anymore it doesn't come up to here. It comes down to here. When she has to buy one, she needs one for a wardrobe. She wears it backwards. Turn it around, and it covers plenty. You say, I don't want to have to do that. I'll feel different. Do you want to feel right with God, or do you want to please the world? No. You say, you're meddling. No, I'm not. I'm preaching Bible. We're told to be holy. And by the way, it's not just women who are to watch the way they take their cues. Men need to take their cues from the Bible as well. Husbands are to be three things to their wives. Look in verse 7. Husbands, in the same way. There's the word likewise. In the same way. So what he's talking about, there is a submission for the husband as well. Who is the submission of the husband for the husband? It's Christ. 1 Corinthians says that the wife is subject to her husbands, and that the husbands are subject to Christ in the same way that Christ was subject to his Father. Go back and read 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I think it is. So, what are men supposed to do? Husbands are to be considerate. Husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding. That's what that word understanding. Be considerate. Now, can I just tell you, I blow this a lot as a husband. I'll help you guys out. I blow this a lot. Sometimes I'm not very understanding. You know, I think differently. I mess up in this area. But God encourages me to keep trying to be understanding. In other words, to understand how God made her. Be considerate of her feelings. You say, but she's all feelings. God made her that way. You like it when she likes what you're doing. Do your head like this. Yeah, you like it then. But when her feelings are hurt, that's when you say, You can't have it both ways. Be considerate. And then he says, giving honor to the wife. This is not in my notes, but when's the last time you honored your wife? Men. You say, this is not what I want you to preach on today. Well, gee whiz, I take my cues from the Lord. He put me in 1 Peter, and there it is. I think Peter probably thought it was pretty important. Can I tell you something? It may be the difference between a victorious life and a miserable life. So you might as well go ahead and accept the medicine and say, you know what? I can make this sweet. He says, giving honor to the weaker vessel. What he's talking about is being chivalrous. Now, we've forgotten to teach our young men how to be chivalrous. What I'm talking about is showing respect for a woman. If she's carrying something and your hands are all you're holding is the remote, something might be wrong. And I'll tell you what, my wife taught me this. I'm like, we're going to leave at 12 o'clock. Well, at 12 o'clock, I'd go to the car and see it. I could go at 5 till because I was ready. Well, she's still busy. She's got all her stuff. We're taking a meal or we're taking something. And at 5 after, I'm sitting in the car blowing the horn. Not now, but I used to. Confession's good for the soul. And she comes out and she's got all this stuff and she's trying to get it to the car. That's not very honorable. I have not treated her with honor. I have not been chivalrous. I have not treated her as a weaker vessel. I'm not saying she's less important. I'm not saying that she's in a lot of ways she's a lot stronger than me. I don't want to have any babies. You understand what I'm saying? She's tough in ways I'm not tough. We should open the door. We should see to their needs because they're a weaker vessel. And then there's a third thought here. As the weaker vessel and as being heirs together. Underline heirs together if you write in your Bible. Heirs together. What that means is that you are fellow heirs and you are to be a companion. Hey, young guys, all you young guys, you teenage boys, you young men, you 20-something-year-old guys, look at me. That girl is not there just to make you look good. See, y'all aren't listening. Guys treat girls like they treat a bass boat. It's something that makes them look good. Or a new truck. That is not why she's there. If you'll humble yourself a little bit and submit, you'll find out she's there to help you be better. If you don't believe her, just ask her. That's true. We're to be companions. Fellow heirs together of the grace of life. And then I didn't plan to say this, but look at that last phrase. That your prayers be not hindered. Amen. How much praying are you going to do while you're married to your wife? How much praying are you going to do when she's in there squalling because you hurt her feelings? It ain't going to work. I can just tell you. Tried and tested and convicted. I've done it. I've done it. But God's taught me so much over the years about that. I'm still trying to teach me. I still have to improve. God wants us to thrive in relationships, in government, in the workplace, in our home, and then verses 8 through 12, and we're finished. In the church. This is the favorite word of Baptists. Look at chapter 3, verse 8. What's that first word? Finally. Just so you know, Paul and Peter use finally not to mean they're finished, but they're finished with this subject. So I'm finally coming to the end of this subject of relationships. See, he had another chapter and a half left in this book. Finally, all of you, not just husbands, not just wives, all of you, be of one mind, have compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous, and not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, that you are called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. He gives us 4 thoughts here on how to have a right relationship in the church. Did you know churches sometimes get crossways? I know y'all can't believe this, but people get mad at one another in church. People get mad at each other and they won't speak to each other. I know too much, but I know of a church that for years, it's not this way anymore, praise the Lord, but for years there was one woman that sat on this side of the church and one woman that sat on that side of the church, and never the two shall meet. So he tells us how to have a right attitude, how to have a right relationship in church. Verse 8, he tells us to keep the right attitude. Love as brothers, be tender-hearted, and be courteous. Then he tells us how to have a right response when somebody hurts your feelings. I said he tells us how to have a right response when somebody hurts your feelings. I just want to make sure y'all got that. Verse 9. Not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, give them a blessing. That's the right response. And by the way, that'll work at work, and that'll work in the home, and that'll even work in the government. And it sure works at church. You say, that preacher hurt my feelings today. Well, just come up and bless me. You can buy me a hamburger. That'll be all right. And you'll be keeping the scriptures. You'll feel better, and I'll feel better. We'll all feel better. You know, I'm making fun, but you know, when somebody hurts your feelings, if you'll do something nice for them, it's amazing how it'll help you forgive them. Remember I said there'll be a little sugar helps medicine go down. When somebody's ugly towards you or they treat you badly, you know how God dealt with the subject of government? He said, pray for those who are in authority over you. I used to never pray for the president until I found that I needed it. I needed it for me as much as he needs it. It changed my whole attitude. Every now and then I slip up. A right attitude. Sometimes thoughts come to my mind. Sometimes I thought, Lord, is that from you, or do I need to say that? A right response. And then he says, keep a right standard when you don't know what the right response is. Verse 10 and 11, he quotes from the Old Testament. He says, for he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. There's a mouthful. That'll guide you. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. That's the standard to live by. Some of you might ought to underline that. You might jot that reference down and go back and put it on your bathroom mirror. Put it on the speedometer of your car. Put it where you'll see it. Make it your background for your telephone. It'll change you. Keep a right standard. And then he tells us why, the right incentive. Verse 12, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. The eyes of the Lord are open. His face is towards you if you do the right thing. His face is against you if you do evil.